let's revisit the alternative perpetrator information, because lately I am seeing a whole bunch of people again trying to blame Brent Kopaka, trying to blame Nicholas Mowich, trying to blame Tyson Farley, James Curtis Leonard, and even Dylan and Bethany. Okay? And you know what they all have in common? None of them were listed as suspects at any point during the investigation. None of them. And none of them appeared in Ann Taylor's alternative perpetrator proffer. And names you will not find in any of the forensic documents are Nicholas Mowich, Brent Kopaka, James Curtis Leonard, Tyson Farley. Yes, Dylan and Bethany's names are in there because they lived in the house. So they had to rule them out of things, of course. But they did not match any of the unknown blood that was in the house, because that was all unknown males, and the 4 alternative perpetrators were tested against the unknown male blood. So that tells you right away, not Dylan and Bethany, okay? So let's look at what Hippler wrote in his order about the alternative perpetrator proffer. So this is from Hippler's order on Ann's proffer of alternative suspects. It says 3 of the individuals were each socially connected to one or more of the victims, interacted with one or more of the victims at social events in the hours prior to the homicide, lived within walking distance of the crime scene, and were familiar with the layout of the victim's home from prior social events. He also goes on to say they have each cooperated with law enforcement, providing DNA samples, fingerprints, and allowing searches as requested. Notably, lab testing has excluded their DNA from samples taken from the crime scene and the victims. The 4th individual did not know the victims, but had a passing connection to one of them while noticing her shopping at a store approximately 5 weeks prior to the homicides. He followed her briefly out the exit of the store, and it says this individual subsequently cooperated with law enforcement, providing his phone number and a DNA sample. As with the other alleged alternative perpetrators, lab reports excluded his DNA from the samples taken from the crime scene and the victims, and there is no evidence connecting him to the crime scene. So that information from Hippler actually helps us rule out a lot of people. So first of all, we know Winco Guy was one of the alternative perpetrators. That's very obvious. But we can rule out several based on what else Hippler said. And that is the other 3 were socially connected with one or more of the victims, had had social contact with one or more of the victims at a social setting prior to the murders, so in the hours leading up, lived within walking distance of the house, and had been in the house prior due to social settings. So, you know who doesn't fit any of that? Nicholas Mowich, Jesse James Bailey, Brent Kopaka, Bryson Gill, James Curtis Leonard, Tyson Farley, yada, yada, yada. So all of the people the conspiracy nuts are pulling out of their ass, none of them were in the alternative perpetrator proffer. Okay? We also can rule out Dylan and Bethany, because if you read the state's objection to the defense's proffer, you'll see that all 4 are listed as the pronouns of he and his. So even though names are redacted, you can tell it's men. Also, all of the DNA that was tested against the unknown male samples from the house. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably going to say, well, maybe Ann didn't have the information about Mowich or about Farley or about blah, 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 blah. Tons of unhinged people called into the tip line, giving Kopaka's name, giving Farley's name, giving Jesse James Bailey's name, etc. And we believe, we don't know for sure because it's redacted, that it was Nicholas Mowich mentioned out of the Spokane medical examiner's office for the guy that was found in Lewiston and airlifted up to Spokane. So, had Ann thought any of those people were legitimately an alternative perpetrator, they would have been listed. You got to use your critical thinking skills, okay? You can't just go, well, this theory sounds nice. No, you actually have to read the documents, read the lab reports, look at who they collected DNA samples from, okay? Look at who they were ruling out. And while the other 3 names are redacted, we know Winco guy, even though his name's redacted, you got a pretty good guess of who the other 3 people were by reading the documents. I'm not going to name them. I mean, we all think we all have a pretty good idea who they are, but what we do know is that they weren't any of the Fantasyland people that the conspiracy theorists like to keep naming. And we know they weren't Dylan and Bethany.